Okay. Here is part 1 of mine and my family's story. On the evening of, like I said, I'm going to be reading off of my notes because I have taken time to sit down and write all of this down because I don't want to get anything wrong or misconstrued because that's just the kind of person that I am. And you'll understand what I mean and why I say that as we go further into this story. On the evening of January 31st, 2003, my son came home from the gym after being at work all day and asked me if I had put an AirTag on his car. Of course, I'm like, I immediately say no, because I would never do something like that. He went on to tell me that he had been getting a couple notifications throughout the day on his phone, and that it was picking up an AirTag. And to full transparency, my husband was home that night. Like I said in my first opener video, he is a shift worker, so he's generally, at work. He works 24, 48s, so he was home that night, and I'm very thankful that he was home. So he and my son went outside to see if they could get the AirTag to ping to his phone, and they did. They were able to find it and find the noise. The noise was coming from the back of my son's car underneath his bumper. So my husband took off my son's rear driver's side tire, and actually had to lay down on the ground to find where this AirTag was. He found it was taped underneath the inside of his bumper. So to be able to place that, somebody had to lay down in our driveway and put it, because it was that far up. It was taped with silver duct tape. And like a small, I call it a dime bag, in a small bag, which I have a picture of what that looked like. This is what it looked like on the bumper of my son's car. And it was when him and my husband came in and showed me, I was like, what the heck? Then it immediately spirals you into asking questions like, what's going on? Have you made somebody mad? You know what I mean? But of course my son's like, no, Mom, I don't, that's not what I do. And that's honestly not the type of person that my son is. He makes friends everywhere. So at that moment, my husband and I advised my son to call our local police department because we had no idea who would have done something like this to our son. And no, again, like I said, my son is not some kind of asshole who, goes around being mean to people, messing with people. That's just not what he does. He was very much a homebody at the time. He worked, like I said, he worked full time, went to college online, and went to the gym after work pretty much every day. So our local police department came out and took the report. We gave them the AirTag, and they were in touch with my son and myself throughout the whole process of figuring out who this person was, whatever, obviously it's a device, so they obviously were able to figure it out. They also kept an eye on our house and us, which was very comforting because of how bizarre the situation was. And also what my husband does for a living, and my son was also, gone during the day. And, my son was part of his job at the time, which he's further into the job that he had at the time, is a public servant. So again, my son also had to notify his work of what was going on because of what he did at the time. Mind you, my son was 19 at the time, so he wasn't a child per se, but he was 19, ridiculous. And like I said, he had done nothing to anyone for anyone to do something like this. So a couple weeks go by, and I, don't get any real update. There's no real change until February 16th, when I had 2 detectives knock on my front door And I was the only one home at the time, so I invited the detectives in, and they started asking me a bunch of questions and asked me if I knew a man by the name of the individual, which I'm not saying names, I'm not doing any of that. I said no, because I didn't know his name, again, stranger, because, bizarre. But then they showed me his picture and told me that his driver's license address was my neighbor. So I found that bizarre, because I'm very aware of who my neighbors are, because I have children. So I was like, no, he's not my neighbor. So then they, again, like I said, when I saw his picture, I still had no idea. And then, because he was 100% not my neighbor, then they showed me a picture of my actual neighbor. And then I was like, oh no, that is my neighbor's ex. Whenever it all started to click. And then I'm like, oh yes, okay, makes sense. Again, that just goes to show you how much I didn't know this person. So the detective then told me that the AirTag was purchased on Amazon on December 20th of 2022. So, a couple weeks before he placed it on my son's car. Oddly enough, that the day before the detectives came to my front door on February 15th, 2023, I was in the backyard with my dog, and I saw this individual's car, not knowing at the time, drive down the back behind the court behind my house. And I thought to myself that was odd, because I had never seen a car like that before in my neighborhood, because the car that he had when he lived with my neighbor years ago was not the same car he drove behind my house. So I didn't know. So after talking with the detectives for a little bit on the 16th, and seeing his picture, I realized that was him that drove down the court behind my house, and I could 100% ID him to the police officers. I told the detectives all of that information, and I also stated that my family in no way, shape, or form had ever been involved with him, never spoke to him, nothing. When he did live over there with my neighbor, I'd never met him, spoken to him, or anything in my neighbor, or anyone in my neighbor's household for that matter. I didn't even introduce myself to her until July of 2021, and at that point he had already moved out and was long gone, completely out of her house. So the detectives were able to subpoena through the state's attorney his phone records and the toll activity from him driving, and they placed him in my neighborhood on all of the dates in question. And the day that he actually placed the AirTag, he placed that AirTag on my son's car at 4:30 in the morning on January 31st, 2023. I'm going to go to part 2.